I want to define meditation as the act of questioning the relationship to thought, body, and world. Now, if we're questioning the relationship to thought, then that cannot be done naively with thought, right? So the questioning must be a different kind of questioning than the usual ways in which we ask questions. Because we usually ask questions using thought. I want us to question the relationship to thought. Okay, this creates a much more radical paradigm shift. And it's a very important one, which is the key to reaching a level of understanding and realization of the real that transcends the level of thought, which is, as I'm sure we have all discovered the hard way, filled with illusion. So we're going to need to understand the relationship to thought, what thought is. What is the relationship of thought to reality? And when there are thoughts passing through the mind, quote unquote, mind simply being that space in which words arise. Thoughts are generally in the form of signifiers, which will be words or images or mathematical formulae, but they are for the most part in words, right? The question is, are thoughts that occur in the mind necessarily one's own thoughts? Because there is a naive ascription to any thought that appears in the mind that, I'm thinking this. But even that is a thought, isn't it? And so the relationship to the self that is observing thoughts and the self that appears as its own representation in thought, whether as the word yo or I or ich or whatever language one has been taught to think in, or in a self-image that one may have of one's body, as if the body were the self. If this appears in the mind, does that representation correspond to the real self that is perceiving it? You see, if it doesn't, then that will create a gap between oneself and reality. And that gap, according to the great sages who have studied this, is what is responsible for our suffering. So we want to understand questioning, meaning inquiry. Sri Ramana uses the term atma vichara, inquire into who am I separate from the thoughts, including the thought I. And therefore, what is the relationship also to the body, because the thought I is generally linked with or even identified with the body image. And therefore, to question whether I refers to an organismic entity, or does I refer to a consciousness that happens to perceive through the senses of an organism? And therefore, what is perceived? Is it a world, or is the world a concept that is produced by thought that creates a grid of meanings over what would otherwise be simply I wouldn't even say raw experience, information, let's say. But that information has to be interpreted. And does our mind accurately interpret the data of the senses, let's say, as well as data of intuitive sources that don't come from sensory, but from, we'll say, extrasensory sources? And is the consciousness, the awareness, able to receive thoughts from different levels of consciousness than the one that pertains to the I that is identified with the body? Okay? So these are the kinds of questions that meditation will not only answer, but will enable us to see reality in an entirely different way, from a different paradigm, if we are open to doing the experiment of questioning the relationship of self to thought. Okay? We assume if there are thoughts in the mind that they're my thoughts. That's the almost reflex tendencies, because most thoughts will contain implicitly or explicitly an I want this, I hate that, I wish this guy were making more sense now, I don't know what he's talking about, or I'm so glad to hear somebody addressing this, or whatever it is. But does the I that is contained in the statement of that thought, is that really your own thought? Or is that a thought that is produced by itself? Is that a thought that you have control over? Do you create your own thoughts? Or do you simply witness thoughts and have no control over them, even though the thoughts may tell you, oh yeah, I'm controlling this thought? It's very easy to experiment with that and come to a conclusion. Here's what I'd like you all to do. For the next 3 minutes, stop thinking. Okay, that's it. I'm going to time it. Open your eyes, close your eyes, whatever you want, but stop the production of thoughts. Okay? Okay, Om Shanti. I'll be merciful. It was actually only 2 minutes. How many of you honestly stopped the production of all thoughts for those 2 minutes? Want to be sure? 0. Okay. If you can't control the production of thoughts, are they your thoughts? Can you really claim to be the one who is creating your thoughts if you can't stop it? I think if you're honest, you have to say, no, the thoughts are actually creating me. Because the thoughts are producing your attitudes, your reactions, your feelings, your sense of who you are. The thoughts are producing you, not you producing the thoughts. You at an ego level, right? You as identified with thoughts are constantly being reproduced by the thoughts themselves. This is called hypnosis, okay? What the ego is a state of hypnosis. It's a hypnotic trance. But can we actually call it self-hypnosis? I don't think so. You're being hypnotized, but you're being hypnotized by a process created by an external other or set of others that has been internalized and is now experienced or imperienced, is how we would use that, understand that, because it's coming from within, not from sense data. There's an imperience of ideas that you think are yours because they happen to be arising in the mind rather than from outside, as right now you're getting thoughts from outside. But in some cases, when you happen to agree with the thought you're getting from outside, you may also think, well, that's my thought. He's just thinking my thought, right? Okay. This is very important because what I want to posit is this. The only way you got a sense of having a separate I is because there is no such thing as a separate I. Okay? In other words, somebody else, when you were very little, used the word I or yo or whatever the language was that was the mother tongue. Whatever that language was, the other person used it, probably your mother, and then you used it. They call the word I, or any of these pronouns, me, my, mine, etc., as shifters. The I is a shifter. In other words, anybody can use it. It's a common term, but anybody who uses it is making a certain statement about a kind of authority over their mind that isn't real. So the only reason you can take in the idea of having a separate egoic identity is that you got it from somebody else and imitated it. Okay, that's what we do. We imitate, like monkeys do. We learn by imitation. And we think we see somebody else having an ego, and I want this, I am that, I have free will, and we take that in, and suddenly we're thinking, I have free will, I am this, and we are now on our way into massive delusion. Right? That's called being normal. It's a state of massive delusion because you have taken in other people's thoughts. They've been internalized, they become tapes that repeat, and you assume they're your thoughts. And those thoughts, not only do they get taken in at a very early age, in fact, some get taken in the intrauterine period, before you're actually born. You're getting your mother's unconscious thoughts, as well as her conscious thoughts, and her affects, if she is anxious about her pregnancy or wishes she had a boy and it turns out you're going to be a girl, or vice versa, or whatever the case may be, whatever the permutations of her attitudes and her desires and fantasies about who you're going to be for her, that will become your own internal narrative. But you won't remember that you got it from outside. You'll just think, oh, that's just the way it is, you know. I should have been aborted. My mother didn't really want to be pregnant. Okay, I don't belong here. And you may go around having those thoughts, even though they were not your thoughts. They were implanted. And maybe your mother changed her mind, but those thoughts went in at an early moment in pregnancy and had an impact. And then even if she said, no, actually, I'm happy to have a baby, it doesn't matter. Those thoughts got put in there. And so they create ongoing traumatic relationship to yourself, because the thoughts are thinking themselves in your mind, and they produce effects in your body. And they produce effects, obviously, in your life, including depression, anxiety, etc., depending on the nature of the thoughts. But you get a whole bunch of those thoughts, and that includes not just your mother's thoughts, but the thoughts that are being had in conversations between mother and father and others who are involved in the pregnancy and the welfare, etc., of this being that you are in process of becoming. And if they're fighting, or if they're splitting up, or if they're having other kinds of relationships that create a sense of insecurity in the mother, you're going to be suffering from that insecurity without knowing its source, because you don't remember consciously, but it has effects. The same thing then when you're in the birth situation will have huge effects depending on the nature of the birth, if it's natural, if it's a C-section, if the mother is awake during it or if she's anesthetized and there's no bonding with the mother. All of these things are going to produce narratives within the subconscious mind that will continue. They don't stop, even though they will be repressed and there will be levels and layers of sediments of other thoughts on top of them, but they're always having an impact. And so we go around with our minds constantly erupting with thoughts and feelings that we are not creating, but that are creating the sense of who we are, that have no relationship to the reality of who we are or what we are, but that will create, as long as we believe our thoughts or pretend to believe them. And here I want to add, I think we're pretending to believe them because we know our parents want us to believe them and we become loyal to their desire to get approval. So we try to match up what we think is their fantasy for us with what is our own fantasies about us. So there's a pretense, but the pretense gets forgotten that it's pretense, and then it becomes a belief, and then that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And then that becomes your life script. Okay. Meditation is the act of questioning that life script, of realizing it's fake, it ain't you, and the realization that those thoughts that are appearing in the mind were conditionings from long ago in the past that simply cause the past situations to repeat in new editions, new inflections, but similar kinds of themes that go over and over again, similar kinds of projections onto people now that you might have experienced with people in the past. And the same sorts of scenarios will unfold in one's life again and again. And this is what Freud called the repetition compulsion. But it's not a compulsion that you have, it's a repetition that the thoughts are doing and going through. And so you are compelled to effect the play that this script is telling you to enact simply by the fact that you believe you are the character that these words in the script are telling you that you are. But what if you're not? Okay? So by questioning the relationship of who you really are to the thoughts and what they're telling you you are, and what you want and what you hate and what you are seeking and what you're running away from, etc., those kinds of relationships that the script creates to others, to the world, to your own body. I hate my body, I love my body, I hate other people, I love them, I don't know if I'm male or female or if I want to be with a male or female. All of these kinds of questions and doubts are created by narratives that become conflicted. Because you may get one narrative from your mother and another narrative from your father and another narrative later from siblings and another from your uncle and another from the system that you enter in school, and et cetera, et cetera. And so what happens is consciousness of the ego that starts out relatively simple and manageable gets fragmented. And these ego fragments then, because they are in conflict with one another, will often be dissociated. Because if you feel too much tension of self-contradictory things, oh, I want this, no, I want that, you feel crucified and crazy. So usually what happens is you dissociate one or more of these fragments and you live in a particular fragment, but then it gets bumped out of possession of the brain and another one takes over and you find yourself doing something that is actually contradictory to what you said you wanted an hour earlier. And so people's lives become incoherent. Okay? because there is more than one narrative, but there's no central intelligence agency, nothing related to anything a government would produce, but the same kind of incompetent self-government in the individual ego that is even worse writ large out there produces a lack of intelligence. There's no actual agency that can integrate and say, well, wait a minute, what do I really want? And sort out these different fragments and decide, well, who am I really? Well, really, you're none of them. But there is no agency that has been authorized to recognize that you are none of them. Okay? So that's where meditation comes in, because it gives you a platform from which, and an authority over your consciousness, from which you can selectively change the script according to a much greater level of refinement of consciousness than you have as an adult, hopefully, than you had as a child, with far more capacity to decide what you really do want to do with your life and who you are and what is the meaning of it all. But where is that going to come from? It's not going to come from the tapes that are already written in the ego mind. It's going to come only from the transcendence of that repetitive set of narratives. And so meditation is the act of questioning them and then asking non-verbally, who am I? Beyond that, transcending the level of representation in thought and entering into the real self. And from there will be a knowing. One's own heart knows what the thoughts cannot know. And a different kind of relationship to reality emerges that isn't based on the ego's, let's say, dualistic frame of reference, which is always divided into desire and fear. Okay? Because the ego always wants to please someone else, because as a baby you have to get the approval of the parents in order to survive. You need them. You don't as an adult, but you may still think you need other people's approval. And you fear their disapproval, or you fear their control of you, or their abandonment of you, or whatever. And so there becomes a sense of paranoia that is endemic to every ego. A sense of paranoia that, oh, things could go wrong if I, go beyond the norm of how I'm supposed to think and act and feel, right? So the paranoia, because the ego never really understood what is its parents' real feeling toward me. Did they want me? Didn't they? How did they want me? And I didn't want to be the way I thought they wanted them. Do they hate me? Do they love me really? What is love? Is it real? Why did they yell at me? Why did they abandon me? Why did they, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's a questioning, a doubting, not of your own mind, but your mind is always doubting the other and doubting the ability to trust the other. And doubting the ability to trust oneself. And so that paranoia, because it's endemic to the ego, means that you're never in peace. Because there's always fear. Paranoia means, okay, I've got to make sure I'm in control, you see. But are you in control? You can't even control your own thoughts. We just discovered that, right? So are you in control of other people, of situations, of life, or are you living in a world that's totally out of control?